If you asked anyone in our town, they would have told you my father was a good man. They would have said he was hardworking, disciplined, old-fashioned in a respectable way. The kind of man who believed children needed structure, not excuses. The kind of man who shook hands firmly and looked you in the eye when he spoke. They would have smiled when they talked about him. No one ever asked me. Our house sat at the edge of the neighborhood, just far enough away that no one passed by unless they meant to. White walls, trim lawn, no broken windows, no shouting spilling into the street. From the outside, it looked peaceful, safe. Inside, everything had a place. Shoes lined perfectly by the door, chairs pushed in exactly the same way every night, dishes washed and dried before bedtime, never left in the sink. Silence after 9. Silence was important to my father. He used to say noise was a sign of chaos, and chaos, he believed, was how families fell apart. So we were quiet. At dinner, we didn't speak unless spoken to. Forks touched plates softly. Glasses were lifted carefully, never clinked. If I chewed too loudly, he would look at me. Not angry, not yelling, just looking. That was usually enough. My mother tried at first. She'd ask how my day at school was, or tell him about a neighbor she'd run into. Her voice was always gentle, like she was afraid of waking something. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes he didn't. Eventually, she stopped trying. People loved my father. Teachers shook his hand during parent meetings. Coaches praised how well-behaved I was. Neighbors waved when he walked by, always saying the same thing. "You're raising him right." He would smile then. Not a big smile, just enough. When we got home, he'd remind me to stand straight, to answer properly, to never embarrass him like that again. I learned early that love to him was something you earned, and mistakes were debts. The first time he punished me, I was 7. I had spilled a glass of milk at the table. It wasn't loud, it didn't shatter, just white spreading across the wood, dripping slowly onto the floor. I froze. My mother moved to clean it, already apologizing, but he raised his hand, not to hit her, just to stop her. "Don't," he said calmly. "He needs to learn." He looked at me for a long time. Then he asked me why I'd done it. I didn't know what to say. My hands were shaking. My throat felt tight. So I said the truth. I didn't mean to. His expression didn't change. "That's not an answer. Try again." I tried again and again. Every answer was wrong. Finally, he told me to stand in the corner, arms up, face the wall. I remember thinking it wouldn't last long, that once he calmed down, he'd let me sit. He didn't. Minutes passed, then more. My arms burned, my legs trembled. I cried quietly at first, then louder when I couldn't help it. That's when he spoke again. "Crying won't save you." I stopped. When it was over, he told me something I would hear many times after that. "This hurts me more than it hurts you." At school, I was the quiet kid, the polite one. Teachers loved that I followed rules, that I never talked back. They wrote notes home about my behavior. My father pinned those notes to the fridge. "See," he'd say, "this is what happens when you listen." Sometimes, when he was in a good mood, he'd ruffle my hair, tell me I was proud. Those moments were rare, and they felt like sunlight through thick clouds. I chased them. I tried to be perfect. But perfection is fragile. One night, I forgot to turn off the hallway light before bed. Just the small thing, something anyone could forget. He noticed. He always noticed. He woke me up by turning on my bedroom light. I squinted, heart pounding, already knowing. "Get up," he said. I stood there in my pajamas while he explained why carelessness was dangerous, why small mistakes led to big failures, why people who didn't pay attention ended up ruining their lives. Then he told me to hold out my hands. I won't describe what happened next. I don't need to. What matters is this. He never raised his voice, not once. His tone stayed calm, almost instructional, like he was teaching a lesson in school. That scared me more than if he'd screamed. Afterwards, he told me to thank him, so I did. My mother watched from the doorway. Her face was pale. Her hands clenched so tightly I thought her nails would drop blood. she never stepped in. Later, she sat on my bed and told me he only wanted what was best for me, that he loved me in his own way, that some fathers were just strict. I nodded. I believed her, because believing was easier than thinking there was something wrong with him, or worse, that there was something wrong with me. As I grew older, the rules multiplied: how long I could shower, how much food I could take, where I could look when he spoke, how fast I had to respond when he called my name. There was always a correct way to exist, and I was always one mistake away from doing it wrong. The house itself seemed to understand him. Floorboards creaked under my weight, but never under his. Doors closed quietly when he touched them. Even the air felt heavier when he entered a room. At night, I lay awake listening for his footsteps, counting the seconds between each sound, learning the rhythm of his movement so I could tell where he was without looking. Fear became a skill. Sometimes friends would come over. Their parents trusted him. He was respected. I watched them laugh in our living room, unaware of how carefully I was breathing. When they laughed, he'd pull me aside. "You embarrassed me," he'd say, even if I hadn't spoken, even if I'd done nothing at all. I learned then that guilt didn't require reason, only power. The worst part wasn't the punishment. It was the waiting. The way my stomach twisted when I heard his car pulling to the driveway, the way my heart raced when he called my name from another room, the way silence could mean safety or something far worse. By the time I was 10, I stopped crying altogether. Tears only made him colder, and cold, I learned, was dangerous. The night everything changed didn't begin with shouting or violence. It began like any other evening. Dinner, quiet, plates scraped clean. He looked at me, studying my face. "You're getting careless," he said. I didn't ask how. I already knew.
There's a moment when fear stops feeling sharp. At first, it's loud, chaotic. It makes your hands shake and your chest hurt. The fear doesn't stay that way forever. Eventually, it becomes familiar. That's when it's most dangerous. I don't remember the exact day I stopped hoping he would change. I only remember realizing that hope hurt more than pain. Pain ended, hope didn't. So I let it go. By then, I understood the rules better. Not the ones he spoke aloud, the real ones. Never react too quickly. Never hesitate too long. Never look surprised. Never look relieved. And most importantly, never look hurt. He hated that. Pain to him was acceptable. Weakness wasn't. I learned how to stand still without trembling, how to keep my voice even when my heart was racing, how to say, "Yes, sir," in a way that sounded grateful instead of afraid. That was progress. At least that's what he called it. If you're listening right now, let me ask you something. Have you ever been scared of someone who claimed they loved you? Not afraid for them, afraid of them. Because that's a different kind of fear. By the time I was 12, the punishments weren't about mistakes anymore. They were about reminders. Reminders of who was in control. Reminders that obedience wasn't permanent. It had to be renewed. Some nights he'd call me into his room just to make me stand there while he listed everything I'd done wrong that week. Not yelling, never yelling, just calmly peeling me apart piece by piece. "You're careless. You're ungrateful. You think too highly of yourself." Sometimes when he ran out of words, he'd sit in silence and wait. Silence meant I was supposed to confess something, anything. I learned to invent guilt just to make it stop. At school, people started saying I was mature for my age, quiet, responsible, focused. They didn't know that silence was the only thing I was good at. My body changed, but my world didn't. The house stayed small. The air stayed tight. My room stayed exactly the same, like he didn't want me growing too fast. My mother grew quieter too. She stopped meeting my eyes. I think that hurt more than anything he did. One night after he'd gone to bed, I asked her why she never stopped him. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Because it's worse when he's angry."
That was it. That was the moment I understood something important. I was alone. If you're listening, what would you have done if you were her? Stayed silent to survive, or spoken up and risked everything? I stopped thinking of him as my father sometime around then. He became something else, a presence, a force, like bad weather you learn to predict. You don't fight storms, you prepare for them. I memorized his schedule, his moods, the sound of his footsteps when he was tired versus when he was irritated. I could tell how the night would end just by the way he closed the front door. Friends stopped coming over. I stopped asking to go out. I learned excuses before anyone asked questions. No, I'm busy. No, my dad needs me home. No, maybe another time. Another time never came. There were nights I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, imagining what it would feel like to live somewhere else. Somewhere loud, somewhere messy, somewhere safe. But even in those fantasies, I was quiet. I didn't know how to be anything else. The worst nights weren't the ones where he punished me. They were the ones where he didn't. Those were the nights I sat awake, waiting, wondering what I'd missed, what mistake I hadn't noticed yet, what punishment was being saved for later. Uncertainty became its own torture. If you've ever lived like that, you know what I mean. Your body never rests. Your mind never sleeps. The breaking point didn't come with screaming or violence. It came with disappointment. One evening, after a long silence at dinner, he looked at me and said, almost sadly, "I expected more from you." That was all. No punishment, no lecture. Just that. And something inside me collapsed, because I realized then I could do everything right and still fail. I wasn't a son to him. I was a project, and I was never going to be finished. That night, I stood in my room staring at my hands and understood something terrifying. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt empty. And emptiness was easier. From that point on, I stopped thinking about escape. I focused on endurance. Because when a child realizes survival is the only goal, something inside them disappears forever. I left that house when I was 18. No dramatic escape, no confrontation, no final words. I packed a bag while he was at work, stood in my room one last time, and realized something strange. I didn't feel relief. I felt exposed, like I was stepping outside without skin. My mother hugged me at the door. She whispered that she loved me, that she was proud. She didn't ask where I was going. I think part of her knew that if she asked, I might stay. I didn't look back when I walked away, not because I was brave, but because I was afraid that if I did, I'd hear his voice telling me to come back, and I wasn't sure I could say no. For a while, freedom felt unreal. Noise startled me. Laughter made me uncomfortable. People asked questions, harmless ones, and my mind scrambled for the right answer, the safe one. There was always a right answer. I still slept with the light off, still lined my shoes neatly by the bed, still flinched when footsteps passed my door. No one was there. My body didn't believe that yet. If you're listening right now, let me ask you something. When you finally escaped something that hurt you, how long did it take before you stopped expecting it to come back? Because trauma doesn't end when the danger does. It settles in. Years passed. I built a life, a job, relationships that didn't last because I didn't know how to exist without rules, without punishment waiting at the end of a mistake. People told me I was distant, hard to read, too quiet. I almost laughed the first time someone called me cold. They had no idea how much effort it took just to feel nothing. Then I got the call. My father was dead. Heart attack, sudden, clean, peaceful. That word made me angry. I waited for something when I heard the news. Relief, joy, closure. What I felt instead was confusion. Because the world didn't change. The air didn't feel lighter. My chest didn't loosen. His voice didn't disappear. That night, I lay in bed and listened for footsteps that never came, and still couldn't sleep. At the funeral, people cried. They spoke about his discipline, his values, the man he was. I stood there, hands folded, face calm. I was good at that. As the casket lowered, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know how to live in a world where he no longer existed, because for so long, everything I was had been shaped around him. His rules still lived in my head. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't take up space. Don't make mistakes. Sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear him. Not his voice exactly, just the feeling of being watched, judged, measured. I'll catch myself standing too straight, lowering my voice, apologizing for things no one noticed. And then I understand the truth. He didn't need to follow me. He raised me to carry him myself. If you're still listening, do you think that makes him powerful or pathetic? I've tried to forgive him. People say forgiveness is how you heal, but some wounds don't need forgiveness. They need acknowledgement. He was my father, and he was the monster. Not because he hit or punished or controlled, but because he taught a child that love was conditional and silence was survival. And even now, long after his death, I still catch myself being very, very quiet, just in case.